Well, I'm Gregg Hamm. I was in the music business in the early part of my life, my first career, from 1973 to 1982. And then went to work with my brother in the heating and air conditioning business, and I've been in heating and air conditioning ever since. I started writing songs with Chris Moore when I was probably 15, 16 maybe, because we hung out together all the time. We had a lot of fun doing it. Chris was a much better songwriter than I was. I figured out real quick that that was not my forte. And then in working with him on writing songs and recording some demos, that's when I became really interested in engineering. When I went to college at Lipscomb in Nashville, I decided I wanted to go to Belmont School, a school of music basically, which they had an engineering school, I think an engineering degree in fact at that time. And I told my dad that's kind of what I wanted to do. And he just happened to know Jimmy Johnson at Muscle Shoals Sound. So he called him and he said, you know, this is what my son wants to do. Would this be a good way for him to learn about music engineering? And Jimmy said, nah, bring him home. Let him come to work for us over here and we'll show him what to do firsthand. So that's how I started at Sound. Walked in the door when I was 17 years old, worked my way up from there, running for hamburgers or whatever I could do. Stood back in the corner watching Jerry Masters, for the most part, do what he did, and that's how I learned business. I worked with Barry Beckett for probably 6 or 7 years, I guess, maybe a little longer than that. And that's where things really took off with me. That's where we did some of the really cool projects. I worked with Bob Dylan, with Barry, 2 albums. We worked with Dire Straits, just a bunch of really good records. Barry was, he was the man, he was the master. We had the kind of relationship that, you know, I could almost read his mind. You know, I knew what he was thinking. I knew what he wanted to do before we did it. He would look at me from the studio and pretty well tell by my body language how it was sounding, how it was feeling. You know, it was all about feel with Barry. And we worked together so long and so many hours that it was really easy for me to know what he wanted, and he could look at me and know whether or not he was getting it. Working with Bob Dylan was interesting. He was a different sort of fella, kept to himself a lot. Most of what he wanted would go through either Barry or Jerry Wexler. You know, we didn't have a lot of interaction. You know, he was, I guess, a little standoffish in a way, because I'm sure so many people would vie for his attention that's just his nature, and that was fine. But just, you know, a talent, you know, beyond talent. You know, it was just an amazing experience. And that was probably a benchmark for me, was the Slow Train Coming album, I would say. One of the ones that I remember that probably was the most fun was with John Prine. He was just such a cool, laid-back character. Nothing was ever wrong. Nothing ever went wrong. You know, it was just a really fun project. It was fun working with Dire Straits, with Martin Knopfler and those guys. And then so many of the great R&B artists, Wilson Pickett, Millie Jackson, worked with Dr. Hook. Just a lot of really cool characters. If I were to characterize the Muscle Shoals sound, you know, it was just the musicians. You know, those guys, they worked together for so long. You know, they just sort of had the same feel. Everything they did was by feel. You know, if it wasn't funky, it wasn't happening. You know, they just really knew how to put that sound together, and it made such a name for themselves because of their sound. They really knew how to make it work with anybody that walked through the door.